The DRC has had a very tumultuous recent history, but it's going through quite a dark period at the moment. Just talk us through, because you're currently traveling and trying to speak to different governments about taking action and figuring out what's going on the ground.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for giving us the space also to raise this issue. Indeed, we are in a very, very problematic situation right now. As of last week, the Rwandan Defense Forces, so the official army of Rwanda, joined with the M23 militia, took over one of the largest cities in eastern DRC, the city of Goma. In what is de facto a foreign occupation of our sovereign territory. They have sabotaged key infrastructure, they have shelled hospitals, they have contributed directly or indirectly to the killing of at least 3,000 civilians. Hundreds of thousands are on the move and are desperately trying to seek shelter. And at the same time, they are installing a regime of pure terror, chasing down journalists, civil society organizers, and installing, if you want, their authority. And the objective, well, according to the M23, to overthrow the legal government in Kinshasa, but also the proven objective of continuing their pillaging of natural resources in the eastern DRC and shipping them over to Rwanda, which then end up on the world market as so-called Rwandan minerals.
And we'll get to that in a moment. But on the issue of the M23, why is your government, your president, choosing not to speak to them and try and find some kind of resolution to this?
I think there is a misconception. There are two frameworks for dialogue as we speak. There is one called the Luanda process, and this is where the government of the DRC interacts with the government of Rwanda, because Rwanda is commandeering the M23 under the auspices of the president of Angola, President João Lourenço. The second framework that exists is the Nairobi process. The Nairobi process is a framework for consultations between Congolese authorities and non-state actors. Non-state actors, including, of course, all armed groups. The M23 was part of this process, excluded itself as it renewed hostilities and attacks against the Congolese government, but we have opened the door to them again to participate in this process. And so we have always remained steadfast in our position. We seek dialogue in the appropriate format. The Luanda process is where we interact with the Rwandan government, and the Nairobi process is where we interact with non-state actors, including the M23.
What do you now want Rwanda to do? Rein back the rebels? What do you think they can actually do to prevent this from escalating even further?
Well, what they should do is, first of all, withdraw their troops from the DRC. So there is also another misconception that presents the situation as one that is led by the M23 militia. UN experts have found that in the DRC, there are at least 4,000 Rwandan troops, military, official military, operating in eastern DRC, a number that is vastly above the estimated number of M23 troops. So what we're looking at now is, as I said before, a de facto occupation by Rwanda behind the facade of the M23. So what Rwanda should be doing, and what the international community should be insisting, is that they withdraw their troops, is that they respect our territorial integrity and our sovereignty, and that they stop violating international human rights and international humanitarian law.
What do you believe is Rwanda's main objective in this?
Well, I think for now, two objectives are very clear. The first one, as I said before, is the pillaging of natural resources. Group of experts, the UN group of experts, has evidence that at least on a monthly basis, 150 metric tons of coltan are mined by children, by women, by men, under the threat of violence in the DRC, transported over to Rwanda and exported as Rwandan minerals. So there is a clear economic objective. In addition to that, the Rwandan government has de facto become the spokesperson or the voice of the M23, a group that in itself has claimed on many occasions wanting to overthrow the legitimate government of the DRC in Kinshasa.
And being accused of all sorts of human rights abuses.
Of course. So at least these twofold objectives are very clear from recent declarations, from the very outright support that Rwanda is providing to the M23 and presenting them as some kind of group that is operating in an altruistic manner for the interest of minorities, which is completely false.
The EU has last year signed a memorandum of understanding with Rwanda when it comes to rare earth minerals. You're saying the bulk of those are from the DRC. The UN says it has found similar evidence. What do you want the Western world, the United States, EU, the UK here to do about this?
So what is clear is that the EU has signed a memorandum of understanding, but it's clearly showing the EU's misunderstanding of the situation. And in this specific case of the MOU, what we have demanded from the EU and what we keep on demanding from the EU is that they suspend this memorandum of understanding until there is greater transparency on the value chain.
Does it look like they're going to do that? Because Brussels has flagged that a number of times.
Exactly. We are continuing the pressure because we believe that it is in no one's interest, not in the EU's interest, and certainly not in the interest of EU taxpayers to actually be bankrolling a regime that is a warmonger in the region and that is responsible for killing thousands of civilians, displacing millions of others. So I do not think that there is a just or legitimate case that is to be made in favor of this memorandum of understanding as it currently stands, neither for the EU nor for EU citizens who I believe also want their organization to uphold these values, such as the respect of human rights.
What have the government here said to you?
We had very fruitful conversations. We welcome the fact that the UK, that for a long time, especially in the Security Council, was very silent on Rwanda's role, has changed its narrative as of December.
Well, the UK had its own objectives with Rwanda.
And we know that policy takes time and governance also takes time, but we welcome the fact that as of December, we have seen the UK stance be much more firm, much more transparent, and has also been much more clear in condemning the actions of Rwanda. Now, what we see in the span of the past weeks is that despite very robust advocacy, outreach to Rwanda, just as the UK government confirmed to me that they had undertaken, this has not stopped President Kagame from unleashing the terror he unleashed on the city of Goma. And so what we insist on is the fact that firmer action has to take place, and that has to happen faster. We need to draw the lessons from the past, and we all know that President Kagame is not reacting to any condemnation. He's not reacting to any declaration, and not even to phone calls, even from his most powerful allies and partners.
Are you worried that a Trump administration doesn't really see Africa as a priority, and perhaps that's why we're seeing this mobilization by the M23 and by Rwanda, because they believe that the US administration is probably distracted elsewhere?
Well, I think there is a cynical calculation behind the timeline of events. I won't put that past Kigali to be that cynical to actually exploit this period of transition. But what we do notice, and that is on the record, is that in the Security Council, in the thick of this transition with an outgoing and incoming administration, the USA has remained firm in its position of condemning Rwanda and of condemning Rwanda's violation of international law. The USA were the first country to do so, and they have kept that language in a consistent manner. So I think we are in a situation, actually I don't think, I know, we are in a situation where the only country that claims that there are no Rwandan troops on DRC soil is Rwanda. If you go through every transcript from the UN Security Council meetings, every declaration, the G7, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the EU, everybody is clearly condemning Rwanda for having troops.
But beyond condemnation, what do you think needs to happen?
We need sanctions. We need firm sanctions. And when we speak of sanctions, we do not speak of sanctions that target the Rwandan population, but sanctions that actually target the Rwandan leadership. First of all, sanctions along the chain of command, because there is a clear evidence link between the Rwandan army and the M23, and of course between decision makers in Kigali. So there needs to be accountability along that chain of command, and there is legal precedent for that, not just in the DRC, but in other cases.
Have you told the UK government to do that?
I have. We also need a ban on Rwandan minerals on the global market, because we have clear evidence that there are no mines in Rwanda, that they have no natural resources. They have plants to process them, but these resources come from the DRC. There is also precedent in that and in making sure that minerals, blood minerals, do not have access to world markets. So that is the second request. The third request, Rwanda is one of the largest troop contributing countries to peacekeeping missions. And I did speak about over 3,000 civilians being killed when the Rwandan army launched its attack against Goma. But also, we had over 17 peacekeepers killed in the process, killed by the Rwandan Defense Forces and by the M23, peacekeepers from South Africa, from Malawi, from Tanzania, from Uruguay. How can it be that one of the largest troop contributing countries to United Nations peacekeeping missions is killing peacekeepers, and that status remains unrevoked? So this is the third point that we insist on.
You are calling for sanctions. Can you just confirm to us whether the countries you're lobbying to, the UK, European countries, the United States, are listening and may move in that direction?
I have high expectations that they move and that they move swiftly, especially in light of the damning evidence, especially in light of the fact that there are clear realities and facts on the ground that can no longer be denied. And if they fail to act, I think that will be a clear choice that they make, not in favor of the international rules-based order, but in favor of other objectives or motivations that we would be keen to understand what they are.
I have to ask you about a number of football teams that are sponsors of this Visit Rwanda slogan. Just tell us about this and what you're asking to happen now. So
the Visit Rwanda campaign is one whereby Rwanda funds or pays different clubs, including Paris Saint-Germain, Arsenal, but also Bayern Munich, to wear the Visit Rwanda logo. The first question that we ask is, again, how do these clubs know that the money used is not money that is derived from the sales of minerals, for example, that have been mined in the DRC through horrific human rights violations? The second question is, how do these different football clubs reconcile with their conscience, with the ideals that football represent of bringing people together, the fact that they are being sponsored but also advertising for a country that is wreaking havoc in the Great Lakes region and that is de facto a warmonger. And so I think, with the move, we wanted to push public reflection within these different football clubs on, shedding some light on the different facets, if you want, of this partnership that may have gone amiss, but certainly do not go amiss on us because, again, in the DRC, thousands of people have been killed, including children who certainly also cheer for Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern Munich, or Arsenal. And so there is a need to reconcile that.
Have you had a response from these clubs?
We have not received any responses, but I believe that they are still soul searching, and we're waiting and looking forward to hearing from them to engage in a constructive conversation.
So you think they may start to listen the more you talk about it?
I think they ought to listen.
Arsenal signed that deal in 2018 when the UK government was doing deals with Rwanda at the time. So it was a sort of a different time in which they signed this deal.
So yes, things change, and again, perspectives change, and sometimes decisions are made without being fully informed, and this is why we raised the subject, because again, it was our reading of the situation that this could not be a fully informed decision. Looking at Rwanda's footprint and impact on peace and security and stability in the region would be so difficult to reconcile with such a decision. And this is why we pushed the envelope to say, well, there's another side to the story and you should be aware of it. And we do hope that this is taken into account.
Was the UK government too soft at that point?
In 2018? Well, not just in 2018. I'll be very frank. This is not an isolated crisis. This is part of a continuum of instability for the past 30 years during which President Kagame has been the unchallenged authoritarian ruler of Rwanda. So this is the result of 30 years of the international community not holding him to account, of the international community closing its eyes on fantastic election results such as 99.15%. This is the result of impunity. This is the result of, giving a blank check and keeping that unchecked. So yes, 2018, certainly, but I think we need to have a more holistic understanding of how we have gotten to this situation where we are now.
Minister, I know we're short on time, but just finally, are you hopeful for the future of your country?
Always. I have no choice. Always.
Minister, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.